Well, good afternoon and welcome to another exciting edition of Coffee with Stephen. So, this week's blog is entitled Chinese Chess. And if you guys have been paying attention to the news, you've probably seen some domestic issues that have started to manifest. One of the big ones taking place right now, which is not the subject matter of this particular blog, is in Iran. I will be talking about that later on. The one that I really want to focus, though, on is on China. There's been a number of unique what's the word I'm looking for? Disturbances, protests, uprisings, potential revolutionary activity taking place within mainland China. Now, this is interesting on a number of different levels. First and foremost, it's fascinating for the fact that when you have a society that is still putatively oriented towards a Confucianist ideal, in fact, it's one of the reasons why I believe that Marxism has been able to survive in China for as long as it has. And irrespective of the definition of Marxism, I know that there's a lot of people that look at modern China and think these guys are communists in name only. That's not an entirely accurate statement. There's still a heavy dosage of Marxist-Leninist ideology that's certainly promulgated definitely at the authoritarian centers of power. We saw a resistance to this back at the Tiananmen Square atrocities that had taken place. But back then, we didn't have the advent of the internet. And to a large extent, these protests were gathered around primarily young individuals, and it was pretty much centered exclusively in Beijing. We are now seeing these protests manifesting throughout China. More importantly, that's a direct result of two factors. Number one, the use of the internet. And even though the Chinese have been working extremely hard, oftentimes with their partners at Apple, to prevent the widespread sharing of information, it's still getting out, right? And as a result, you still have this dynamic movement across a lot of different social sectors. That's another important facet of this as well. It's not relegated exclusively to the young. You're seeing this at different levels within society. Now, it's oriented, at least initially, oriented around the COVID restrictions, more specifically, Xi's zero COVID policy. And people are becoming extremely resistant to that. What is going to be interesting, the reason I call it Chinese chess, the Chinese Central Committee for years has always had a fairly high degree of factionalism built into it. This served a couple of different purposes. Primarily, it allowed for the development of what would best be described as fall guys. And we certainly saw this in Tiananmen. When the things started to go south, they were able to blame, essentially, Jiang Zemin. Okay, now, because she has been able to coalesce such a cult of personality, there really isn't a group of factions that exist within the Politburo that they can sit there and point to as being the cause and the issues associated with these things. These are all loyalists to Xi. Well, the problem is if he starts to blame one faction that is in fact loyal, all other factions will suddenly become suspect, which destroys that loyalty that he's been able to establish. In addition, if he reduces some of the authoritarianism, that could also speed up the process of Chinese internal dissent. So it's really potentially very ugly the way these things can go, and it will have global implications, including here in the United States. So I definitely encourage you to read the blog. I think this one's fairly important. Okay, blog comes out, of course, on our website Wednesday morning at www.artemishq.com/blog. As always, I want you to train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. Above all else, stay safe.